What would you do if you built an empire worth billions, only to be treated like hired help at the most exclusive venue in the city? And what if you had the power to buy that entire venue the very next morning and fire everyone who witnessed your humiliation? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Sterling Financial Tower as Jasmine Crawford stepped out of the private elevator on the 47th floor. Her burgundy power suit was immaculate, tailored to perfection by a designer who understood that confidence was sewn into every seam. At 38, she moved with the quiet authority of someone who had built something extraordinary from nothing. The nameplate on her corner office door read Jasmine Crawford, CEO and founder, Pinnacle Investment Group. Behind that door lay the nerve center of a financial empire that managed over $12 billion in assets. From tech startups in Silicon Valley to renewable energy projects across 3 continents, Pinnacle had its fingerprints on some of the most innovative investments of the decade. Jasmine paused at the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked downtown Chicago. The city stretched endlessly before her, a tapestry of glass and steel that reflected her own journey. 20 years ago, she had arrived here with a finance degree from Northwestern, $200 in her checking account, and a dream that most people would have called impossible. Her assistant, Marcus Thompson, knocked gently before entering with the morning briefings. Marcus had been with her for 8 years, ever since Pinnacle had grown large enough to warrant a dedicated executive assistant. He was one of the few people who remembered when her office was a cramped space above a deli, when she answered her own phones and stayed until midnight every night. "The quarterly reports are ready for your review," Marcus said, setting down a leather portfolio. The renewable energy division exceeded projections by 18%. The tech portfolio is up 32% for the year. Jasmine nodded, scanning the numbers with the practiced eye of someone who had learned to read profit and loss statements like sheet music. Every figure told a story, and today's story was one of unprecedented success. Pinnacle wasn't just profitable, it was transformational. They didn't just invest money, they invested in futures. Her phone buzzed with a text from her younger sister Maya, who worked as a pediatric nurse in Atlanta. "Saw the Forbes article about you yesterday. Mom would be so proud." The message included a photo of their mother's grave, decorated with fresh flowers. Jasmine smiled softly, remembering the woman who had raised 2 daughters on a teacher's salary after their father left when Jasmine was 12. Dorothy Crawford had worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table and dreams alive in her daughters' hearts. She had passed away just 3 years ago, 1 month before Pinnacle closed its first billion-dollar deal. The irony wasn't lost on Jasmine that her mother, who had spent her entire career fighting for resources in underfunded schools, never got to see her daughter become one of the most powerful black women in finance. But Dorothy's lessons lived on in every decision Jasmine made. Work twice as hard, stay 3 steps ahead, and never let anyone convince you that you don't belong. Marcus cleared his throat gently. There's also the matter of tonight's event, the Children's Hospital Gala at the Meridian Grand. Jasmine looked up from the reports. The Meridian Grand was Chicago's most prestigious event venue, a 19th-century mansion-turned-luxury hotel that hosted only the city's most exclusive gatherings. Politicians announced campaigns there. Fortune 500 companies held board meetings in its private dining rooms. Old money families celebrated weddings in its ballroom that had once welcomed foreign diplomats. Tonight, the venue would host the annual Children's Hospital Gala, a black-tie fundraiser that drew the city's elite. Jasmine had been invited not just as a donor, but as the evening's keynote speaker. Pinnacle had pledged $2 million to the hospital's new pediatric cancer wing, the largest single donation in the institution's history. "The speech is loaded in your tablet," Marcus continued. "Dr. Elizabeth Morrison from the hospital will introduce you at 8:30. The auction follows at 9:15. Jasmine had spent weeks crafting her remarks. She wanted to talk about why children's health care mattered to her, about growing up watching her mother stretch every dollar to afford basic medical care, about the responsibility that came with financial success. But she also knew that in rooms like the one she'd enter tonight, her presence alone would be a statement. As the afternoon wore on, Jasmine moved through her usual routine of meetings and calls. She approved a $15 million investment in a clean water technology startup founded by two women engineers from MIT. She reviewed acquisition proposals for 3 companies in the sustainable agriculture sector. She participated in a video conference with investors in Tokyo who were eager to partner on a renewable energy project in Southeast Asia. Every decision reflected the values that had guided Pinnacle from its inception. They didn't just chase profits, they pursued impact. The companies in their portfolio were solving real problems, creating jobs, and building a better future. It was a philosophy that had attracted top-tier investors and generated returns that made Wall Street take notice. At 5 o'clock, Jasmine began preparing for the evening. She had chosen a midnight blue gown that struck the perfect balance between elegance and authority. The dress was sophisticated without being flashy, expensive without being ostentatious. Her jewelry was minimal. Diamond stud earrings that had belonged to her grandmother and a simple gold watch. As she applied her makeup, Jasmine thought about the speech she would give. She wanted to challenge the audience to think beyond charity as an obligation and consider it as investment. These children weren't just recipients of generosity. They were the future innovators, leaders, and changemakers who would shape tomorrow's world. Her driver, Robert Chen, arrived at 6:30 sharp. Robert had been driving for Pinnacle's executives for 5 years, ever since the company had grown large enough to maintain its own transportation service. He was discreet, reliable, and had a talent for navigating Chicago traffic that bordered on supernatural. The black Mercedes glided through the early evening streets as Jasmine reviewed her notes one final time. Through the tinted windows, she watched the city transition from the business district's glass towers to the tree-lined streets of the Gold Coast, where the Meridian Grand stood like a monument to old-world elegance. As they approached the venue, Jasmine could see the red carpet stretching from the street to the grand entrance. Photographers waited behind velvet ropes, their cameras ready to capture the arrival of Chicago's power players. Valets in crisp uniforms directed luxury cars into perfectly organized lines. The Meridian Grand rose before her like something from a different era. Its limestone facade was illuminated by strategically placed lights that highlighted every architectural detail. Carved lions guarded the entrance, and massive oak doors opened into a world where power was measured not just in dollars, but in access, influence, and the ability to shape conversations that would ripple through the city's corridors of power. Jasmine had attended hundreds of events like this one, but tonight felt different. Tonight she wasn't just attending, she was leading. Her speech would be heard by senators, judges, CEOs, and philanthropists who controlled billions in assets and wielded influence that extended far beyond Chicago's borders. As Robert opened her door, Jasmine stepped onto the red carpet with the quiet confidence that had carried her from that cramped office above the deli to the pinnacle of American finance. She had no way of knowing that in less than 4 hours, everything would change. That by tomorrow morning she would own the very building she was entering tonight, and that by tomorrow afternoon half the people inside would be looking for new jobs. The marble entrance hall of the Meridian Grand opened like a cathedral of wealth and influence. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings painted with scenes of 19th-century prosperity, while guests in black tie and evening gowns moved across floors that had welcomed presidents and foreign dignitaries for over a century. Jasmine entered to the soft murmur of conversation and the gentle clink of champagne glasses. The venue's general manager, Bradley Patterson, greeted her with the practiced smile of someone accustomed to managing Chicago's elite. Patterson had overseen the Meridian Grand for 15 years, turning it into the city's most sought-after destination for power gatherings. "Ms. Crawford, welcome to the Meridian Grand," Patterson said, extending his hand with rehearsed warmth. "We're honored to host tonight's event and your generous contribution to the Children's Hospital." Behind Patterson stood the venue's assistant manager, Catherine Walsh, clipboard in hand, coordinating the evening's logistics with military precision. Walsh had worked her way up through Chicago's hospitality industry, and the Meridian Grand represented the pinnacle of her career. Tonight's gala would host 400 of the city's most influential residents, each paying $5,000 per plate for the privilege of attending. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, the hospital's chief of pediatric oncology, approached with genuine warmth. Unlike the polished corporate executives filling the room, Dr. Morrison carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who saved lives rather than managed portfolios. She had worked 18-hour days for the past decade, building one of the nation's leading pediatric cancer programs. "Jasmine, I can't tell you how much tonight means to us," Dr. Morrison said. "Your donation will fund 3 new research positions and upgrade our entire imaging department." As they spoke, Jasmine noticed the venue's intricate details. The ballroom's walls were lined with oil paintings of Chicago's founding families, men in dark suits whose names graced buildings throughout the city. Persian rugs worth more than most people's homes covered sections of the polished floor. Everything whispered of legacy, tradition, and the kind of generational wealth that opened doors before you even knocked. Senator Patricia Reynolds arrived with her usual entourage, drawing immediate attention from the assembled crowd. Reynolds had represented Illinois for 12 years and was rumored to be considering a presidential campaign. Her presence elevated any event from significant to historic. "Jasmine Crawford," Senator Reynolds said, approaching with a politician's perfect handshake, "I've been following Pinnacle's work in renewable energy. Impressive portfolio." Judge Harold Fitzgerald, recently appointed to the Federal Circuit Court, joined their conversation. At 62, Fitzgerald had spent 4 decades climbing the legal profession's highest peaks. His wife, Margaret, managed one of Chicago's largest art museums and served on boards that controlled millions in cultural funding. "Your speech tonight," Judge Fitzgerald said, "I understand you're addressing sustainable investing's future, fascinating intersection of profit and purpose." The networking continued as Chicago's power structure revealed itself in carefully choreographed conversations. Banking executives discussed policy changes with city council members. Tech entrepreneurs pitched ideas to venture capitalists. Philanthropists evaluated which causes deserved their attention and which leaders merited their support. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Thomas Blackwood, chairman of Heritage Trust Bank, commanded attention near the bar. Blackwood's family had controlled Chicago banking for 3 generations, and Heritage Trust managed assets for half the families in attendance. His son, Michael, recently promoted to senior vice president, stood beside him absorbing lessons in relationship management that couldn't be taught in business school. The key, Thomas Blackwood was explaining to a small circle of listeners, is understanding that money follows trust, and trust follows tradition. People invest with institutions they understand, with leaders who reflect their values. Jasmine recognized the subtext. In rooms like this, tradition often meant exclusion, and understanding frequently translated to maintaining existing power structures. She had spent 20 years navigating these coded conversations, learning to speak the language of elite finance while never forgetting where she came from. Victoria Sterling, CEO of Sterling Properties and heir to a real estate empire, glided through the crowd with the effortless grace of someone born into wealth. Sterling Properties owned significant portions of Chicago's downtown core, including several buildings that housed Pinnacle's satellite offices. At 45, Victoria had never known financial insecurity, never questioned her right to occupy the city's most exclusive spaces. The evening's auction items were displayed along the ballroom's perimeter, a week at a private villa in Tuscany, courtside seats for the entire basketball season, dinner with a Nobel Prize winner, and the crown jewel, a private concert by a Grammy-winning artist for the winning bidder and 50 guests. Marcus approached discreetly with updates from the office. "The Tokyo deal closed an hour ago," he whispered. $47 million committed to the water purification project. Legal wants your signature on the Singapore documents first thing Monday. Even at tonight's gala, Jasmine's empire continued expanding. 3 time zones away, her investments were creating jobs, solving problems, and generating returns that would fund tomorrow's innovations. Pinnacle operated around the clock because global challenges didn't observe Chicago business hours. The venue's catering staff moved through the crowd with practiced efficiency. Servers carried silver trays of hors d'oeuvre, prepared by the Meridian Grand's award-winning culinary team. Everything was orchestrated to project effortless elegance, though Jasmine knew dozens of people were working behind the scenes to maintain the illusion. As 8 o'clock approached, guests began moving toward the ballroom's main stage area. Tonight's program would begin with cocktails and networking, followed by Dr. Morrison's introduction of the evening's keynote speaker. Jasmine's speech was scheduled for 8:30, positioning her remarks at the evening's emotional center. The hospital's board chairman, Robert Chun Sr., father of her driver, took the stage first to welcome guests and outline the evening's mission. The new pediatric cancer wing would serve children from across the Midwest, offering treatments unavailable anywhere else in the region. The facility represented hope for families facing every parent's worst nightmare. Tonight, Chairman Chen announced, "We celebrate the generosity that makes healing possible and the vision that turns medical advances into childhood miracles." Jasmine felt the weight of anticipation building. Her speech would challenge this audience to think beyond charity as tax deduction and embrace philanthropy as investment in human potential. She planned to share stories from her own childhood, when her mother's teacher salary barely covered basic health care, when emergency room visits meant choosing between medical care and rent money. The room's energy shifted as Dr. Morrison approached the podium. This was the moment Jasmine had prepared for, the opportunity to address 400 of Chicago's most influential residents about values that transcended profit margins. Her words tonight could influence millions in future donations, shape healthcare policy discussions, and demonstrate that successful business leaders could champion causes bigger than their own bottom lines. She had no way of knowing that within the next hour, every relationship in this room would be tested, every assumption about power and respect would be challenged, and her own response would transform her from honored guest to the venue's owner before the sun rose again. The applause began as Dr. Morrison reached the microphone, and Jasmine prepared to step into the spotlight that would change everything. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison stepped to the podium with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to delivering life-changing news to families. The room settled into respectful silence as she adjusted the microphone and looked out over the sea of black tie and evening gowns. "Tonight we celebrate more than generosity," Dr. Morrison began. "We celebrate the vision that transforms compassion into action. Our keynote speaker embodies this principle. Jasmine Crawford has built one of America's most successful investment firms, while never forgetting that true wealth lies in the lives we touch." Applause rippled through the ballroom as Jasmine rose from her seat at the head table. She smoothed her midnight blue gown and walked toward the stage, her steps measured and confident. The spotlight found her as she climbed the 3 steps to the platform, illuminating her against the backdrop of oil paintings depicting Chicago's founding fathers. Jasmine Crawford founded Pinnacle Investment Group with a simple belief, Dr. Morrison continued, that capital should create change, that success should serve purpose, and that the most important returns can't be measured in dollars alone. The introduction painted Jasmine's journey from Northwestern graduate to billion-dollar CEO, highlighting Pinnacle's focus on sustainable investing and social impact. The audience listened with the polite attention of people accustomed to honoring achievement, though most had heard similar speeches at dozens of similar events. "Please join me in welcoming Jasmine Crawford," Dr. Morrison concluded, stepping aside as applause filled the ballroom. Jasmine approached the podium with the poise that had carried her through countless boardroom presentations. She placed her notes on the lectern and looked out over the assembled crowd. 400 faces looked back expectantly, representing billions in collective wealth and decades of accumulated power. "Thank you, Dr. Morrison, and thank you all for being here tonight," Jasmine began, her voice carrying clearly through the sound system. "When I was 8 years old, my sister Maya broke her arm falling from a swing set. My mother, a teacher making $32,000 a year, faced a choice that no parent should have to make." The room remained attentive as Jasmine continued, weaving personal narrative with broader themes about healthcare access and community responsibility. She spoke about growing up watching her mother stretch every dollar, about understanding that medical care was a luxury many families couldn't afford. "Tonight's donation from Pinnacle Investment Group isn't charity," she said, warming to her theme. "It's an investment in human potential. Every child who receives treatment in the new wing might become the scientist who cures cancer, the teacher who inspires a generation, or the leader who solves tomorrow's challenges." 15 minutes into her speech, as Jasmine transitioned to discussing sustainable investing's role in healthcare innovation, a commotion began near the ballroom's service entrance. 2 servers had collided while carrying trays of dessert plates, sending china crashing to the marble floor. The sound echoed through the ballroom like gunshots. Heads turned toward the disturbance as staff members rushed to clean up the mess. Jasmine paused mid-sentence, waiting for the disruption to settle before continuing. It was then that Victoria Sterling's voice cut through the momentary silence with devastating clarity. "Well," Victoria said to Thomas Blackwood, her voice pitched just loud enough to carry across several nearby tables, "I suppose we know who's responsible for the help making such a mess tonight." The comment hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Several guests turned to look at Victoria, then at Jasmine, then back again. The implication was unmistakable. Victoria had just suggested that Jasmine, the evening's keynote speaker and largest donor, was somehow connected to the serving staff's accident. Michael Blackwood snickered quietly beside his father. "Like attracts like," he murmured, earning a sharp look from Judge Fitzgerald's wife, but no verbal correction from anyone else. The silence that followed was deafening. 400 people sat frozen, uncertain how to respond to what they had just witnessed. Dr. Morrison's face went ashen. Senator Reynolds stared at her wineglass. Bradley Patterson, the venue manager, looked like he wanted to disappear through the floor. Jasmine stood at the podium, microphone in hand, every eye in the room now focused on her. The moment stretched endlessly as she processed what had just happened. She had been publicly humiliated not by strangers or competitors, but by members of Chicago's most elite circle, in front of the city's most powerful residents, while delivering a speech about human dignity and social responsibility. The irony was almost breathtaking. Here she stood, having just donated $2 million to heal children, being treated as if she belonged in the kitchen rather than at the podium. The insult was carefully crafted, subtle enough to maintain plausible deniability while being unmistakably racist and demeaning. Thomas Blackwood cleared his throat softly, but said nothing. Senator Reynolds examined her fingernails with sudden fascination. Judge Fitzgerald studied the ceiling's painted angels, as if seeing them for the first time. Not one person in that room of 400 challenged Victoria's words or offered any form of support. The silence became a living thing, growing heavier with each passing second. Jasmine could feel the weight of centuries of exclusion, generations of being told she didn't belong, decades of having to prove herself in rooms that questioned her very presence. She thought of her mother, Dorothy, who had faced similar moments in faculty meetings, where she was the only black teacher. She thought of every young girl watching tonight's live stream on the hospital's website, seeing how power responded when faced with a choice between comfort and courage. Jasmine's hand tightened almost imperceptibly on the microphone. When she spoke, her voice was calm, measured, and carried clearly to every corner of the ballroom. "Thank you for that illuminating perspective," she said, her tone so controlled it was almost musical. "It's always educational to see people's true character revealed under pressure." She paused, letting her words settle over the room like snow. "Dr. Morrison, I want to thank you for this opportunity to address such a revealing audience. The children you serve deserve better than this room can offer tonight." Jasmine stepped back from the podium with the same poise she had brought to it. No dramatic gestures, no raised voice, no public confrontation. She simply gathered her notes, nodded once to Dr. Morrison, and walked calmly toward the ballroom's main exit. The silence followed her every step. 400 people watched Chicago's most successful black female CEO walk away from the podium, away from the gala, and away from a room that had just shown its true face. As she reached the ballroom doors, Jasmine turned back once. Her eyes found Victoria Sterling, then Thomas Blackwood, then swept across the sea of faces that had chosen silence over solidarity. "The donation stands," she said clearly. "The children shouldn't suffer for adult failures." Then she was gone, leaving behind a room full of Chicago's elite to contemplate what they had just witnessed and what they had failed to do. Outside, the cool evening air wrapped around her shoulders as she walked toward her waiting car. Robert Chen stood by the Mercedes, door already open, his face carefully neutral though his eyes held a mixture of anger and admiration. As the car pulled away from the Meridian Grand, Jasmine sat in the back seat, her mind already moving beyond hurt toward calculation. She had been humiliated publicly, abandoned by supposed allies, and dismissed in the very act of giving. But Jasmine Crawford hadn't built a $12 billion empire by accepting defeat. She had built it by turning obstacles into opportunities, by transforming rejection into fuel, and by understanding that real power wasn't just about having money. It was about knowing exactly how to use it. The Meridian Grand's lights grew smaller in the rear window as they drove toward downtown. By tomorrow night, Jasmine reflected, those lights would be hers to control. And everyone who had chosen silence tonight would learn the true cost of their complicity. The Mercedes glided through Chicago's late-night streets in absolute silence. Robert Chen navigated the familiar route from the Gold Coast to downtown while Jasmine sat motionless in the back seat, her midnight blue gown a stark contrast against the black leather interior. The city lights blurred past the tinted windows like fallen stars. 20 minutes after leaving the Meridian Grand, Jasmine's phone began vibrating with increasing urgency. Text messages, missed calls, and notifications flooded her device as word of her abrupt departure spread through Chicago's interconnected social networks. She ignored them all, her mind working with the precise calculation that had built Pinnacle Investment Group from a $200 dream into a $12 billion reality. At 9:47 p.m., as Robert pulled into the underground garage of Sterling Financial Tower, Jasmine finally spoke. "I need you to drive me home, then pick me up at 6 a.m. sharp tomorrow morning," she said, her voice calm and measured. "We're going to have a very busy day." Robert nodded in the rearview mirror. In 5 years of driving for Pinnacle's executives, he had learned to read the subtle signs of his passengers' moods. Tonight, he recognized something different in Jasmine's stillness. Not defeat or hurt, but the dangerous quiet of a predator choosing its moment to strike. Jasmine's penthouse apartment overlooked Lake Michigan from the 42nd floor of one of downtown's most exclusive residential towers. The space reflected her personality. Clean lines, carefully chosen art, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered commanding views of the city she had conquered through sheer determination and strategic brilliance. She poured herself a glass of wine, a 2015 Bordeaux that had cost more than most people's monthly rent, and settled into her favorite chair facing the lake. The water stretched endlessly into darkness, lit only by the occasional ship making its way toward the harbor. Her phone continued its relentless buzzing. Marcus had sent 17 text messages, each more urgent than the last. Dr. Morrison had called 4 times, her voicemails growing increasingly distressed. Even Senator Reynolds had reached out, though Jasmine noted the politician's message carefully avoided mentioning what had actually happened at the gala. At 10:23 p.m., she finally answered when Marcus called for the 8th time. "Jasmine, thank God." Marcus's voice was tight with worry. "The hospital is in crisis mode. Dr. Morrison is beside herself. The board chairman wants to know if you're reconsidering the donation. Half of Chicago's media is calling for statements." "Schedule a meeting for 6:30 tomorrow morning," Jasmine said quietly. "Conference room A, I want our entire legal team present, plus Patricia from corporate acquisitions and David from private wealth management." "Legal team?" Marcus's voice rose in pitch. "Jasmine, what are you planning?" "Due diligence," she replied simply. "And Marcus? I want a complete financial analysis of the Meridian Grand on my desk by 7 a.m. Ownership structure, debt obligations, cash flow, everything. Use whatever resources necessary." The line went quiet for a moment. Marcus had worked with Jasmine long enough to recognize the tone in her voice, the same controlled intensity she brought to hostile takeovers and complex international acquisitions. "The Meridian Grand," he repeated slowly. "You want to buy the venue." "I want to own it," Jasmine corrected. "There's a difference." After ending the call, Jasmine walked to her home office and opened her laptop. The blue glow illuminated her face as she began making a series of calls that would set tomorrow's events in motion. Each conversation was brief, precise, and expensive. She called Jonathan Pierce, Pinnacle's head of mergers and acquisitions, interrupting his weekend in the Hamptons. "I need you on a plane to Chicago tonight. Emergency acquisition opportunity. Hostile if necessary." She reached out to Amanda Ross, the city's most ruthless real estate attorney, offering triple her usual fee for immediate availability. "I need contracts drawn up for a property purchase, complete ownership transfer, including all staff employment agreements." Finally, she contacted David Kim, her private banker at Northern Trust, authorizing him to liquidate whatever positions necessary to free up immediate cash. $50 million liquid by market open tomorrow, wire transfer capabilities standing by. As midnight approached, Jasmine's phone rang with a call that surprised her. The caller ID showed Maya Crawford, her sister in Atlanta, who rarely called this late unless something was wrong. "I saw the news," Maya said without preamble. "Channel 7 ran a breaking story about you leaving some fancy gala early." They're saying there was an incident. Jasmine smiled for the first time since leaving the Meridian Grand. Maya had always possessed an uncanny ability to sense when her older sister needed support, even from 800 miles away. There was an incident, Jasmine confirmed. Someone decided to remind me of my place in their world. And now you're going to remind them of your place in the real world, Maya said. It wasn't a question. She had watched her sister navigate Chicago's power structure for 20 years, had seen Jasmine transform obstacles into opportunities time and again. Something like that, Jasmine replied. Good, Maya said firmly. Mom always said the best revenge is success, but sometimes successful people need to make their own justice. After hanging up, Jasmine returned to her laptop and began researching the Meridian Grand's ownership structure with the methodical precision of a surgeon preparing for a complex operation. The venue was owned by Heritage Hospitality Group, a subsidiary of Blackwood Family Holdings, Thomas Blackwood's empire. The irony was perfect. The man who had sat silently while she was humiliated would wake up tomorrow to discover that his prized venue was under attack by the very woman he had failed to defend. At 1:15 a.m., her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Ms. Crawford, this is Catherine Walsh from the Meridian Grand. I wanted you to know that not everyone in that room agreed with what happened tonight. Some of us saw exactly what it was, and some of us remember who signs our paychecks. Jasmine stared at the message for a long moment. Catherine Walsh, the assistant manager who had stood beside Bradley Patterson during her arrival, who had coordinated the evening's logistics with such precision. Interesting. She typed back, "Thank you for reaching out. Your courage is noted and appreciated." Catherine's response came quickly. "If you need any information about venue operations, I'd be happy to discuss employment opportunities elsewhere." Jasmine smiled grimly. Even the Meridian Grand's own staff recognized which way the wind was blowing. By tomorrow afternoon, Catherine Walsh might find herself in a very different position indeed. As dawn approached, Jasmine finally closed her laptop and prepared for bed. She hung her midnight blue gown in the closet, noting that this was likely the last time she would wear it to an event where she wasn't in complete control of the venue, the guest list, and the consequences of anyone's poor behavior. Tomorrow would bring swift, decisive action. The Meridian Grand had stood as a symbol of Chicago's old money elite for over a century, a fortress of tradition where people like Victoria Sterling felt safe to reveal their true characters. But fortresses, Jasmine reflected as she turned off the lights, were only as strong as their financial foundations. And she was about to discover just how solid those foundations really were. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was the city sprawling endlessly beyond her windows. A city that would wake up tomorrow to discover that power, real power, belonged to those bold enough to seize it. And by sunset tomorrow, the Meridian Grand would belong to her. The sun hadn't yet broken the horizon when Jasmine Crawford's private elevator opened onto the 47th floor of Sterling Financial Tower at exactly 6 a.m. The building hummed with unusual energy for a Saturday morning as Pinnacle Investment Group's emergency response team assembled in Conference Room A, the glass-walled space that had witnessed dozens of billion-dollar deals over the past decade. Marcus Thompson stood at the head of the polished mahogany table, surrounded by legal documents, financial reports, and multiple laptops displaying real-time market data. His usually impeccable appearance showed signs of an all-night work session, loosened tie, rolled sleeves, and the intense focus of someone who understood that the next few hours would reshape Chicago's power landscape. "The Meridian Grand Financials," Marcus announced as Jasmine entered, sliding a thick folder across the table. Heritage Hospitality Group acquired the property in 2019 for $85 million. Current debt load is $32 million. Annual revenue is approximately $18 million, but operating costs are astronomical due to the historical preservation requirements. Jonathan Pierce, freshly arrived from his red-eye flight from New York, looked up from his laptop screen with the predatory smile of a merger specialist who had identified weakness. The beautiful thing about old money families is they often prioritize prestige over profit margins. Heritage Hospitality is bleeding cash on the Meridian Grand. They're keeping it afloat through cross-subsidization from their other properties. Patricia Chen, Pinnacle's corporate acquisitions director, spread architectural plans across the table. The building itself is worth $60 million, but the real value is in the operating licenses. Event permits, liquor licenses, historical designations. It would take a new owner 3 years minimum to replicate those regulatory approvals. Amanda Ross, the real estate attorney Jasmine had summoned at midnight, entered carrying a briefcase that contained the legal weapons for a hostile acquisition. "I've prepared 3 different contract structures," she announced. Clean purchase, leveraged buyout, or asset acquisition with employment termination clauses. Employment termination clauses, Jasmine repeated, her voice carrying the cold precision that had earned her respect in boardrooms across 3 continents. "I want complete control over staffing decisions effective immediately upon closing." David Kim joined the meeting via video conference from Northern Trust's private banking center, where he had spent the early morning hours liquidating positions and arranging wire transfers. $52 million liquid and ready for immediate deployment. The markets are responding favorably to yesterday's renewable energy announcements, so we're selling from a position of strength. As the team refined their acquisition strategy, news of Friday night's Gala incident began spreading through Chicago's interconnected elite networks with the velocity of digital wildfire. The first reports appeared on society blogs and gossip websites, but by 8 a.m., legitimate news outlets had picked up the story. Channel 7's morning show led with a segment titled "Prominent CEO Walks Out of Children's Hospital Gala." The report carefully avoided mentioning Victoria Sterling by name but confirmed that an incident occurred during Ms. Crawford's keynote address that prompted her abrupt departure. The Chicago Tribune Society columnist Patricia Henley published a more detailed account that sent shockwaves through the Gold Coast's breakfast tables. Without directly quoting Victoria's words, Henley described an atmosphere of uncomfortable tension and, quote, comments that many attendees found inappropriate and racially charged. Social media erupted with competing narratives. #JusticeForJasmine began trending as supporters shared stories of their own experiences with Chicago's exclusive venues. #StandWithMeridian emerged as a counter hashtag, though it gained significantly less traction and was dominated by anonymous accounts. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison held an emergency press conference at Children's Hospital at 9 a.m., flanked by the board of directors and visibly struggling to control her emotions. "Last night's events were deeply troubling," she stated. "Ms. Crawford's donation remains the largest single contribution in our hospital's history, and her commitment to our pediatric cancer program is unwavering." The hospital's statement carefully avoided taking sides while confirming that something significant had indeed occurred. But behind closed doors, the board was in crisis mode. 3 major donors had already called to express concerns about the hospital's association with controversy, while others had pledged additional support in solidarity with Jasmine. At Heritage Trust Bank, Thomas Blackwood arrived at his office to find his assistant fielding calls from reporters, board members, and concerned clients. The bank's stock price had opened down 2% as investors processed news reports and tried to assess potential reputational damage. Victoria Sterling woke to discover that her name was being whispered in text messages and phone calls throughout Chicago's social circles. Her own public relations firm had called at 7 a.m. to discuss damage control strategies, while 3 charity boards were quietly reviewing her participation in upcoming events. By 10 a.m., the story had evolved beyond local society gossip into a national conversation about racism in elite spaces. Business journalists from New York and Los Angeles were calling Pinnacle's offices for comment. Cable news networks were preparing segments about discrimination in corporate America. Inside Conference Room A, Jasmine's team had finalized their attack plan. Heritage Hospitality Group would receive a formal offer to purchase the Meridian Grand at 11 a.m. sharp, exactly 48 hours after the previous night's humiliation. "The offer is $65 million, Jonathan Pierce announced, 15% above current appraised value, all cash, 7-day closing period. They can't refuse without triggering fiduciary responsibility questions from their own investors." Amanda Ross had prepared contingency contracts for every possible response. "If they reject the initial offer, we have a hostile takeover structure ready to deploy. I've identified 3 Heritage Hospitality investors who might be willing to sell their stakes for the right price." Catherine Walsh, the Meridian Grand's assistant manager, had provided crucial intelligence through encrypted messages sent throughout the morning. Staff morale was in freefall, with several key employees already updating their resumes. Bradley Patterson, the general manager, had spent the morning in damage control meetings with Heritage's corporate executives. At 10:47 a.m., Catherine sent a message that changed everything. Emergency staff meeting called for noon. Word is spreading that ownership is concerned about reputational liability. Several department heads are being asked to prepare incident reports. Jasmine read the message twice, then looked up at her assembled team. They're panicking. Heritage is treating this as a public relations crisis instead of recognizing it as a business threat. That's going to be their downfall. Marcus pulled up Heritage Hospitality's stock performance on the main conference room screen. The company's shares had declined 4% since market open, with trading volume significantly above normal levels. Institutional investors were clearly concerned about potential backlash. The beautiful irony, Patricia Chen observed, is that their attempt to distance themselves from last night's incident is actually making them more vulnerable to acquisition. They're signaling that the Meridian Grand is a liability they'd prefer to shed. Quote, at exactly 11 a.m., Amanda Ross submitted the purchase offer through certified legal channels. $65 million, all cash, with a requirement for response within 72 hours. The legal language was precise, aggressive, and designed to communicate that this was not a negotiation, it was an ultimatum. Within minutes of the offer's submission, Heritage Hospitality's legal department was in emergency session. Thomas Blackwood found himself in the impossible position of defending an asset that had become a reputational nightmare, while trying to understand how Victoria Sterling's moment of casual racism had transformed into an existential threat to his family's business empire. By noon, the story had achieved viral status. #MeridianGate was trending nationally as social media users shared their own experiences with discrimination in exclusive venues. Jasmine's dignified response to public humiliation had resonated far beyond Chicago's elite circles. The Children's Hospital reported that online donations had increased by 300% since Dr. Morrison's morning press conference. Supporters were making contributions specifically to honor Jasmine's courage and to demonstrate that her values had broader support than Victoria Sterling's prejudices. As lunch hour approached, Jasmine sat in her office reviewing preliminary responses to the acquisition offer. Heritage's lawyers were already requesting extension deadlines and additional due diligence periods, classic stalling tactics that revealed their fundamental weakness. She had spent exactly 14 hours transforming from humiliated guest to hostile acquirer. By sunset, she would control the venue where she had been insulted. And by Monday morning, she would control the employment fate of everyone who had witnessed her humiliation in silence. The ripple effect had begun, and like all waves born of justice, it was gaining strength with each passing hour. At 2:17 p.m. on Saturday afternoon, exactly 27 hours after Victoria Sterling's fateful comment, Thomas Blackwood's phone rang with the call that would end his family's century-long ownership of Chicago's most prestigious venue. Heritage Hospitality's board of directors had reached a unanimous decision in their emergency session: accept Jasmine Crawford's offer immediately. $65 million, Blackwood said into the phone, his voice hollow with defeat. All cash, 7-day closing. They want to finalize by next Friday. Quote, on the other end of the line, Amanda Ross smiled as she reviewed the acceptance documents being transmitted electronically. Mr. Blackwood, given the circumstances, my client is prepared to expedite closing by Monday afternoon. We have financing pre-arranged and legal documentation ready for immediate execution. The speed of capitulation shocked even Jasmine's experienced acquisition team. Heritage Hospitality wasn't just selling, they were fleeing. The reputational damage from Friday night's incident had created a toxic asset that the Blackwood family needed to shed before it contaminated their broader business empire. Within hours of the acceptance, Jasmine convened a different kind of meeting in Conference Room A. This wasn't about financial structures or legal strategies. This was about justice, employment, and the future of every person who worked at the Meridian Grand. Catherine Walsh sat across from Jasmine, no longer the nervous assistant manager who had secretly reached out the night before. In the span of 48 hours, Catherine had evolved into a key intelligence asset, and now, potentially, the new general manager of Chicago's most exclusive venue. Staff roster, Catherine said, sliding a comprehensive document across the mahogany table. Every employee, from executive management down to part-time servers. Performance reviews, disciplinary records, and most importantly, detailed accounts of who said what Friday night. Jasmine studied the files with the methodical precision of a prosecutor building a case. 43 full-time employees, 67 part-time staff, and 12 management-level positions. Each name represented a person who had witnessed her humiliation, and each would now face a choice about their future employment. Bradley Patterson knew exactly what was happening, Catherine continued, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was revealing. He heard Victoria's comment, saw your reaction, and chose to do nothing. Worse, when I suggested we should address the situation, he told me to, quote, mind my own business and remember who pays our salaries. Marcus Thompson took notes as Catherine detailed the venue's power dynamics. The sommelier, Henri Dubois, had been visibly uncomfortable during the incident and had privately expressed disgust at the evening's events. The head of catering, Maria Santos, had worked her way up from server to department head over 15 years and commanded deep respect from the entire kitchen staff. What about the servers who had the accident? Jasmine asked. The ones whose collision gave Victoria her opening? Carmen Rodriguez and James Mitchell, Catherine replied immediately. Both excellent employees. Carmen has been with us for 8 years, putting herself through nursing school. James is a graduate student in hospitality management. Neither had anything to do with the timing. It was just an unfortunate accident that got weaponized. Jonathan Pierce entered the conference room carrying a stack of employment contracts and termination agreements. Legal has prepared 2 sets of documents, he announced. Retention agreements for staff we want to keep, and severance packages for those we don't. The retention contracts were generous. Salary increases, performance bonuses, and equity participation in the venue's future profits. The severance packages were legally bulletproof, but carried a clear message. Your services are no longer required. At 4:30 p.m., Jasmine made her first executive decision as the Meridian Grand's new owner-elect. Bradley Patterson would be terminated immediately upon closing, effective Monday afternoon. His severance package included 6 months' salary and a non-disclosure agreement, but he would never again hold a management position at any venue under Pinnacle's growing hospitality portfolio. The security supervisor, Robert Hayes, would also be dismissed. Catherine had revealed that Hayes had privately laughed about Jasmine's departure, describing it as the help showing herself out. His replacement would be someone who understood that security meant protecting the dignity of all guests, not just those with the right skin color or social connections. Victoria Sterling's preferred server, a young man named Tyler Brooks, who had repeatedly requested assignment to her table and had been overheard making disparaging comments about certain types of guests, would find his employment terminated as well. Excellence in service meant treating every patron with equal respect, regardless of the server's personal prejudices. But Jasmine's transformation of the Meridian Grand extended far beyond personnel changes. She envisioned a venue that would redefine Chicago's event hosting landscape. A space where business leaders from every background could gather without fear of casual racism or exclusionary behavior. I want to establish the Meridian Grand Foundation, Jasmine announced to her team. 20% of all venue profits will fund scholarships for hospitality management students from underrepresented communities. We're going to train the next generation of event professionals who understand that service means dignity for everyone. Patricia Chen began drafting the foundation's charter while Marcus coordinated with Pinnacle's marketing team to rebrand the venue's public image. The new Meridian Grand would maintain its luxury standards while embracing values of inclusion, respect, and social responsibility. Catherine Walsh's promotion to general manager became official at 5:45 p.m., complete with a salary increase of 40% and authority to implement immediate operational changes. Her first initiative would be mandatory diversity and inclusion training for all staff, conducted by Northwestern University's Business School. I want every employee to understand that they represent more than just this venue, Jasmine explained during Catherine's promotion meeting. They represent a vision of what Chicago's hospitality industry can become when it prioritizes character over connections. The weekend's transformation accelerated Sunday morning when 3 of Chicago's most prominent event planners called Pinnacle's offices requesting meetings about future bookings. Word had spread through the city's professional networks that the Meridian Grand was under new ownership, and forward-thinking organizers wanted to align themselves with Jasmine's reputation for excellence and integrity. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison called personally to request the venue for next year's Children's Hospital Gala. "We want to hold the event where it will mean the most," she told Jasmine during their Sunday afternoon conversation, "where the children we serve can see that dignity and respect aren't just words, but values that shape how we treat each other." By Sunday evening, the staff roster decisions were finalized. 38 employees would receive retention offers with improved compensation and clear advancement pathways. 12 would be terminated for various reasons, ranging from poor performance to demonstrated bias. 3 management positions would remain open for external candidates who shared the venue's new commitment to inclusive excellence. Carmen Rodriguez and James Mitchell, the servers whose accident had inadvertently triggered Friday night's confrontation, received more than retention offers. Jasmine established full scholarship programs for both. Carmen's nursing school tuition would be covered through graduation, while James would receive funding for a master's degree in hospitality management with guaranteed employment upon completion. "Excellence has many faces," Jasmine explained to Catherine during their final Sunday meeting. "Our job is to recognize it wherever it appears and help it flourish." The weekend concluded with Jasmine standing alone in her penthouse apartment, looking out over Lake Michigan as she had 3 nights earlier. But everything had changed. Friday night, she had been a successful CEO, invited to speak at someone else's venue. Monday afternoon, she would be the owner of that venue, with complete authority over its operations, its values, and its future. Her phone buzzed with a text from Maya in Atlanta. "Saw the news about you buying the place. Mom would have said you took lemons and built a lemonade factory." Jasmine smiled, remembering her mother's lessons about turning obstacles into opportunities. Dorothy Crawford had faced her own moments of exclusion and disrespect, but she had taught her daughters that true power came not from avoiding difficult situations, but from changing them entirely. Monday morning would bring the formal closing, the employee announcements, and the beginning of a new chapter for the Meridian Grand. But Sunday night belonged to reflection on how swiftly justice could move when backed by sufficient resources and unwavering determination. In less than 72 hours, Jasmine had transformed from humiliated guest to empowered owner. Tomorrow, she would begin the work of ensuring that no future guest would ever face the choice between dignity and opportunity. The transformation was complete, but the real work was just beginning. 6 months after Jasmine Crawford signed the papers that transformed her from humiliated guest to venue owner, the Meridian Grand had become something unprecedented in Chicago's hospitality landscape, a luxury venue where excellence and inclusion operated as twin pillars of success. The Monday morning staff meeting that had announced the ownership change felt like ancient history now. Jasmine remembered walking into the grand ballroom where she had been humiliated, facing 43 employees who didn't know if they still had jobs. Some had looked defiant, others terrified, a few hopeful. Now, as she stood in the same ballroom preparing for the venue's first annual staff recognition ceremony, she saw confidence, pride, and genuine enthusiasm in the faces of her team. Catherine Walsh approached the podium with the poise of someone who had discovered her true calling. 6 months as general manager had transformed her from a nervous assistant into a hospitality leader whose innovative programs were being studied by venues across the country. Revenue is up 37% from last year, Catherine announced to the assembled staff. Guest satisfaction scores have reached all-time highs. But more importantly, we've hosted events for organizations that never felt welcome here before. And we've created employment opportunities for people who never saw themselves in luxury hospitality. The statistics told a remarkable story. The Meridian Grand now hosted events for the Urban League, the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, and the Association of Professional Women. Tech entrepreneurs from Southside Incubators held product launches in rooms that had once been reserved exclusively for old money families. Young professionals from every neighborhood in Chicago celebrated achievements in spaces where merit mattered more than pedigree. Carmen Rodriguez stood near the back of the ballroom, wearing scrubs from her final clinical rotation. In 4 weeks, she would graduate from nursing school debt-free thanks to the scholarship program Jasmine had established. But tonight, she had returned to thank the woman who had transformed her accidental collision into a life-changing opportunity. "I used to think places like this weren't for people like me," Carmen told Jasmine during their private conversation before the ceremony. "Now I know that excellence doesn't have a zip code or a skin color. When I start working at Children's Hospital next month, I'll carry that lesson with me." James Mitchell had thrived even more dramatically. His master's degree in hospitality management was progressing ahead of schedule, and he had already accepted a position as assistant operations manager at the Meridian Grand's newest sister property. a boutique hotel Jasmine had acquired in downtown Detroit as part of Pinnacle's expanding hospitality portfolio. "You didn't just give me a scholarship," James reflected during his presentation to the staff. "You showed me that one person's moment of cruelty could become everyone's opportunity for growth." The venue's transformation had rippled far beyond its limestone walls. Northwestern University's business school had established the Crawford Center for Inclusive Leadership, funded by a $10 million donation from Pinnacle Investment Group. The center's research on diversity and corporate governance was already influencing hiring practices at Fortune 500 companies. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison entered the ballroom carrying a folder of photographs from the new pediatric cancer wing at Children's Hospital. The facility had opened 3 months ahead of schedule, powered by donations that had poured in after Jasmine's dignified response to Friday night's humiliation became a viral symbol of grace under pressure. "These children are alive today because you chose courage over comfort," Dr. Morrison told Jasmine as they reviewed the photos together. "Your example taught an entire city that standing up for dignity creates possibilities we never imagined." The images showed young patients receiving treatment in state-of-the-art facilities, their families finding hope in spaces designed for healing. The wing had already treated over 200 children from across the Midwest, offering procedures and therapies unavailable anywhere else in the region. But perhaps the most significant transformation had occurred in Chicago's broader business community. The Meridian Standard had become shorthand for companies that prioritized inclusive excellence over exclusionary tradition. Corporate events increasingly featured diverse speakers, multicultural themes, and explicit commitments to dignified treatment for all attendees. Senator Patricia Reynolds had delivered a speech at the previous month's Healthcare Innovation Summit that directly referenced Jasmine's example. "Leadership isn't about maintaining comfortable traditions," the senator had said to 300 pharmaceutical executives. "It's about having the courage to build better ones." Quote, Judge Harold Fitzgerald had cited Jasmine's case in a recent ruling on employment discrimination, writing that dignity in professional settings isn't a privilege to be granted selectively, but a right to be protected universally. The legal precedent was already influencing similar cases across the federal circuit. Even Thomas Blackwood had experienced unexpected consequences from that Friday night 6 months ago. Heritage Trust Bank had lost several major clients who questioned the institution's commitment to inclusive values. Blackwood himself had been quietly asked to step down from 2 nonprofit boards where his presence had become potentially problematic for fundraising efforts. His son Michael had left Chicago entirely, accepting a position with a banking firm in Charlotte where his family name carried less weight and his past indiscretions were unknown. The Blackwood empire, built over 3 generations, was contracting as clients and partners sought institutions more aligned with contemporary values. Victoria Sterling's fall had been even more dramatic. Her real estate empire remained intact, but her social influence had evaporated. Country club memberships were quietly revoked, charity board positions eliminated, and invitations to exclusive events simply stopped arriving. She had become a cautionary tale about the true cost of casual cruelty in an interconnected world. The evening's keynote speaker was Maya Crawford, who had flown in from Atlanta to address the staff recognition ceremony. As she took the podium, Jasmine saw her mother's strength reflected in her sister's confident bearing. 6 months ago, my sister was insulted in this very room, Maya began, her voice carrying the same quiet power that had made Jasmine such an effective CEO. But rather than accept that insult as the price of admission to elite spaces, she transformed the space itself. Maya's speech outlined the broader implications of Jasmine's response. Young Black women across the country were starting their own companies, inspired by the example of someone who had refused to accept humiliation as inevitable. Business schools were revising curricula to emphasize ethical leadership and inclusive decision-making. My sister didn't just buy a building, Maya continued. She bought the opportunity to rewrite the rules about who belongs where and how excellence gets defined. Quote, the ceremony concluded with the unveiling of a bronze plaque in the Meridian Grand's main entrance hall. The inscription read, "Excellence has many faces. Dignity belongs to all. Leadership means creating spaces where both can flourish." As guests mingled in the ballroom afterward, Jasmine found herself standing near the spot where Victoria Sterling had made her fateful comment 6 months earlier. The space looked identical. Same crystal chandeliers, same marble floors, same oil paintings of Chicago's founding fathers. But everything had changed. Tonight's event had drawn 300 guests representing every segment of Chicago's business community. Tech entrepreneurs from Bronzeville networked with venture capitalists from Lincoln Park. Immigrant small business owners shared stories with established corporate executives. Young professionals from every background saw themselves reflected in the venue's leadership and values. A young woman approached Jasmine near the evening's end, introducing herself as Alicia Washington, a recent MBA graduate who had just launched a fintech startup focused on underserved communities. "I wanted to thank you," Alicia said, her voice steady despite obvious emotion. "6 months ago, I thought success meant being accepted into spaces like this. Now I understand that real success means changing those spaces entirely." Jasmine smiled, remembering her own early career when she had believed that belonging meant conforming to others' expectations rather than establishing her own standards. "The most important lesson I've learned," Jasmine replied, "is that dignity isn't something you earn through achievement. It's something you claim through courage." As the evening wound down and guests departed into the Chicago night, Jasmine remained in the ballroom for a few final moments. She thought about her mother, Dorothy, who had faced her own moments of exclusion but had taught her daughters that obstacles were temporary while character was permanent. The Meridian Grand would continue hosting Chicago's most important events, but now those events would reflect the city's full diversity of talent and leadership. The venue had become a symbol not of exclusionary tradition, but of inclusive excellence, proving that luxury and dignity could coexist beautifully. Jasmine's phone buzzed with a text from Catherine Walsh. Next week's bookings include the National Association of Women Engineers, the Chicago Black Chamber of Commerce, and 3 Fortune 500 companies specifically requesting our diversity and inclusion expertise. Excellence is good for business. As Jasmine walked toward the exit, her heels clicking on the same marble floors where she had been humiliated 6 months earlier, she carried with her the quiet satisfaction of someone who had transformed personal pain into collective progress. The true measure of leadership she had learned wasn't the ability to endure insults with grace. It was the courage to ensure that future generations would never have to endure them at all. Outside, Robert Chen waited by the Mercedes, ready to drive her home through streets that now knew her not as a victim of discrimination but as an architect of change. The city lights reflected off the car's windows as they pulled away from the Meridian Grand, a building that would forever stand as proof that justice delayed need not be justice denied, and that one person's courage to say no more could create possibilities no one had dared to imagine. As the Mercedes moved through downtown Chicago, Jasmine reflected on the profound transformation that had rippled far beyond one venue's walls. Letters arrived weekly from young women across the country who had started their own businesses, applied for leadership positions they once thought impossible, or simply found the courage to speak up in moments of injustice. Each story reinforced the truth that individual acts of courage create collective waves of change. The Meridian Grand Foundation had already awarded scholarships to 87 students from underrepresented communities, while the venue's employment practices had become a case study taught in business schools from Harvard to Stanford. Corporate America was slowly awakening to the reality that diversity wasn't just morally correct. It was financially profitable and strategically essential. 3 weeks earlier, Jasmine had received an unexpected call from the White House Office of Economic Development, inviting her to chair a national commission on inclusive business practices. The appointment would allow her to scale the Meridian Grand model across industries and geographic regions, transforming individual success into systemic change. But perhaps the most meaningful measure of her impact came in a handwritten letter from a 12-year-old girl in Detroit named Destiny Williams. "Dear Miss Crawford," the letter read, "my teacher showed us your story. I want to be a CEO like you someday. I want to buy buildings and fire people and help kids like my little brother who has cancer. Thank you for showing me that girls who look like me can do anything." Jasmine had that letter framed in her office, positioned where she could see it during every meeting, every negotiation, every moment when business decisions required moral courage. It served as a daily reminder that leadership meant building ladders for others to climb, not just reaching heights yourself. The Mercedes pulled into the underground garage of Sterling Financial Tower, completing a journey that had begun 6 months earlier with humiliation and evolved into transformation. As the elevator carried her toward the 47th floor, Jasmine smiled at the recognition that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to choose dignity over convenience, and new chances to prove that excellence had no color, gender, or zip code, only character. The city stretched endlessly beyond her windows, full of young dreamers who would inherit the world she was helping to build. A world where belonging wasn't something you begged for, but something you created. Where power served justice rather than tradition, and where one person's refusal to accept the unacceptable could reshape entire industries. In the end, that was the truest measure of success, not the buildings you owned or the wealth you accumulated, but the doors you opened for others and the barriers you removed from their path. Jasmine Crawford had learned that the most powerful word in business wasn't yes, it was enough. Enough of the old ways. Enough of the closed circles. Enough of the comfortable cruelties that masqueraded as tradition. The lights of Chicago twinkled like promises in the darkness, each one representing someone whose life might be changed by the courage to demand better. And somewhere in that vast city, another young woman was preparing to face her own moment of choice, armed with the knowledge that dignity was non-negotiable and justice was always worth the fight. As Jasmine settled into her office chair, she opened her laptop to review the week's upcoming events. The Meridian Grand's calendar was fuller than ever, hosting everything from tech startup launches to international diplomatic receptions. Each booking represented a small victory in the larger war against exclusion, a step toward the world her mother had dreamed of, but never lived to see. Her phone buzzed with a notification from LinkedIn. Another message from a young entrepreneur seeking mentorship. Another request to speak at a conference about transformative leadership. Another invitation to share her story with the next generation of business leaders. The requests had multiplied exponentially since that Friday night 6 months ago, each one representing someone who understood that true power lay not in maintaining barriers but in demolishing them. Jasmine thought about Victoria Sterling, whose name had become synonymous with the old guard's dying gasps. Word had reached her that Victoria was selling her Chicago properties and relocating to a smaller city where her reputation might be rehabilitated. It was a fitting ending for someone who had confused cruelty with sophistication, exclusion with excellence. But Jasmine's thoughts quickly returned to the future she was building. One conference room, one hiring decision, one mentorship conversation at a time. The work was far from finished, but the foundation had been laid. Excellence truly did have many faces, and thanks to one woman's refusal to accept humiliation as the price of success, those faces were finally being seen, celebrated, and empowered to lead. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, and new opportunities to choose justice over comfort. And Jasmine Crawford would be ready. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.